We got anyone in the audience yet?
Uh, Not really. Let's see here.
So we got one attendee on there.
We got Will on here. That's about it so far.
Well, either way, it's recorded, so we can make sure we push it out to people. I wanted to thank James and Dan for joining us today and being willing to give a presentation. This is part of a kind of a forward trajectory where we're trying to build on, get people excited about BC, find your passion for BC, and so that we can move into how you can grow excellence. And kind of a part series, and then we're going to move into a bit of kind of training on how to do some principles of BC. So this is a bit of finishing out the year, and we want to finish it strong amongst all the teams. So introducing James and Dan here. James, formerly of BDO, you're from what I said, going on doing your own thing now, and Dan, you're still with BDO, two major powerhouses in the industry for resiliency, for consulting, understanding every aspect of multiple industries when it comes to resiliency products. So bringing a wealth of knowledge. They're former VOP members. James was one of the first VOP members that came up and through the program. So our first success story here. And then Dan, you were also a VOP member as well, right?
Yeah, I was back in 2020 virtual course.
Oh yeah, 2020. That was a tough time, right?
Oh man, the dark days. Yeah, for sure.
Well, welcome, and I will pass the mic on over to you and let you both have it.
Yeah, and Dan, what we were planning on doing is we'll give everybody a little bit of a background of our journeys to how we got to where we are today. And then we were going to both speak to some of the lessons that we've learned along those journeys. So, Dan, do you want to go first? Since I think you're probably a little bit more relevant and recent to a lot of the audience.
Yeah. So I think I mean this. So actually, I'll begin by saying someone asked me the other day. This was probably a couple months ago, and I retired in August of 21. And so, for almost 4 years now, if I missed being a Marine, being in the Marine Corps every day, and I looked at them and I looked dead in the eye, and I'm like, it hadn't even dawned on me to think about missing it. I love being a Marine for 20 years, but transitioning over the last 4 years has really been a phenomenal experience, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that. I like most Marines, I grew up in Texas, right? But I joined the Marine Corps pre 9/11, and when the service was pretty different. But was in infantry officer course on 9/11. So remember if you've been to the Hawk there at TBS, it's the bar, it's the Oak Club there. And I just remember watching the second plane hit the towers, and really the trajectory of my career radically changed from that's kind of the first lesson, right, in resiliency, is like expect the unexpected, and it really kind of took off from there. Had a variety of just kind of a pretty standard infantry career, span from Japan to East Africa and all those great places in between, company command, OPSO tours, some really great non-operational tours. Lived in Japan, Yokosuka, for a couple of years, and really, enjoy the time. Started looking at transition when I realized this was not going to be my career for the rest of my life. About 3 years before, had really intended on working in government, and was involved in kind of Marine Corps force development activities, requirements development, procurement. Had a good opportunities to work with a variety of different research labs, and so felt like I had a good opportunity there. After you do that for a couple of years, you kind of realize civilian government side is different. And about a year left in service, about 2019, right before the pandemic, realized I think private sector is probably the way that I want to go. And that's when you really just start building your network, right? And I think everyone's kind of done this. This is the, make the network right for you. And, was under the kind of the same guidance that everybody else gets, right? You need to know 2 of those 3 big questions. Where do you want to live? What do you want to do? And how much do you want to make? Or do you need to make? I live in Arlington, Virginia, right outside of DC. Pretty much knew that we were going to settle here. Kids were established, have a good community here. Wouldn't go back to Texas because my mother-in-law lives in Texas, so we needed that, you know, that 20-hour separation via car. And so Arlington, Virginia was the place, which kind of defined how much I needed to make. So that just left me with, you know, knowing kind of figuring out what I wanted to do. And you know, the only way that you really figure that out is, you know, doing stuff, trying stuff out, you know, working through different opportunities. Again, I knew what I didn't want to do, which was government work. And so, you know, I kind of made that question a bit more challenging. Luckily, I was able to, again, just through conversations, find different opportunities. I discovered the DRI course for veterans, simultaneously to kind of finding a former mentor in the industry. And so that kind of allowed me to kind of transition this into a skill bridge opportunity, which was where I met Jim for the first time, and was able to give his practice 3 months of unpaid labor at the government's expense, and really, you know, and I'll say this to everybody, it would not have had the opportunity to join BDO at that time without that skill bridge experience. Was really an opportunity to kind of open my eyes to industry, you know, kind of recognize the how much I didn't know, but also it allowed me to appreciate how much I did know. Like all of those soft skills that I developed over 20 years, you know, just through being a curious individual and being able to, you know, keep a conversation and figure out what makes things tick. Really gave me the confidence to kind of pursue this further. You know, I generally tell people about my transition when they ask. I'm like, you know, if I could have written a script at the beginning, you know, this is the script that I would have written. But then I caveat that by saying, if you'd have told me how hard it was going to be, I don't know if I would have done it. The transition to the private sector, and we'll talk a little bit about this in kind of our next piece here. You know, you learn a whole different vocabulary. You have to learn, you know, you know, what makes you know, industries, you know, tick. How do people make money, right? That wasn't a concern in the military, but that was what was generally, you know, that was really kind of where our starting point was. And so, you know, learning how to read a balance sheet, understand P&Ls, organizational constructs. I mean, it definitely was a major learning curve. But with that, I'll go ahead and transition over to Jim, and he can talk about what it was like in the olden days when you got out of the Army.
Yeah, I promise that I'm not going to try to be all back in my day, but there's some pretty significant differences between Dan's journey and my journey, mostly because veterans that are transitioning now or have been transitioning over the last few years have a heck of a lot more resources available to them than when I made my transition. Because I got in, I was actually a college op, went to OCS, so I did not do ROTC or West Point or anything. I decided after September the 11th that I wanted to get commissioned when I graduated college. So I went to basic training just like everybody else down in scenic Fort Benning, Georgia, 9 weeks, and then they drive you from one side of the base over to the other side to the OCS school. And I like to say I accomplished in 14 weeks what many of you other commissioned officers took 4 years to do. But I was an infantry officer. I stayed at Benning for a while, did all the basic training, stuff that they expect, airborne school, ranger school, OBC. And then I got assigned to the 82nd, and I spent most of my time deployed. My first deployment was to Iraq, and it was to actually stand up a maximum security prison up in the middle of Kurdistan, because it was when they were shutting down Abu Ghraib. So we did the external security. I think we had a whopping 4 weeks to get ready for that deployment, but it was relatively short. We were only gone for about 6 months. Back home for about 9 months. And then we were cut orders on December 26th, and I was in Baghdad January 2nd. And my claim to fame is when George Bush ordered the troop surge, the big troop increase into Iraq, I was the very first guy. We had to, change out our patches because he hadn't announced it yet. So they made us take off our 82nd patches and put on 10th Mountain patches and move forward as part of the torch to prepare. And it was supposed to be a 4-month deployment, ended up being 15 months in between Sadr City and the international zone. So just had a few days to, kiss the family goodbye, load up on the plane. I was married at the time, and for our first 4 years of marriage, because I was married to somebody else who was also in the service, we were physically co-located for 7 months. So that includes like 2-week R&R stints and stuff like that. So we started to say, hey, this isn't really conducive to setting up a family. So I got out as a junior officer as an 03. My ex-wife went into AGR at the Guard Bureau. So we ended up back here in the DC area. And I did what pretty much everybody who was getting out of the military did at the time, went into government contracting. I worked for a company called Battelle Memorial Institute, which is actually predominantly a research and development nonprofit. They run a bunch of the national labs. They actually created the first fuel for nuclear submarines. They invented some pretty cool stuff. But what I was doing was I was working in what is now CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It used to be NPPD, the Office of Infrastructure Protection. But my first job was designing and facilitating exercises, crisis simulations, focusing on private sector security and resilience. But I started to get exposure to other things. What the government calls COOP, what we call business continuity, was also housed in the same organization. So we were doing a little bit of planning around the actual contingency plans for the Office of Infrastructure Protection itself, doing stuff like going to, secret underground facilities and working at the FBI, or I'm sorry, the DHS crisis action team. They also had an incident management cell. So we were doing things like responding to hurricanes Ike and Katrina and Gustav and all those types of things. I eventually transitioned over to working at Deloitte, where I was still originally focusing on Homeland Security associated issues, got to work on stuff like the Run, Hide, Fight program. But I also got exposure to other agencies. So the Government National Mortgage Association, Ginnie Mae, which does all your VA loans, became a client. But then I started to eventually transition to helping companies directly because, the Office of Infrastructure Protection focuses on private sector associated issues. But there are some things that the government doesn't really care about, right? They don't care about executive misconduct, right? That doesn't really fall into their wheelhouse. They're worried about whether or not people can continue to get access to healthcare, whether or not our electrical grid is stable, whether or not our technology and telecommunications infrastructure will continue to work when there's a terrorist attack or something bad that happens across America. So my first gig directly for the private sector was actually working for Nike. Where we stood up their headquarters business continuity program and their crisis management program. And I really just stayed in the consulting world for several decades after that. I worked at, I worked at Deloitte for a couple of years, and then I transitioned to a company called Control Risks, which is actually most known for their work in the kidnap for ransom space. Interesting company. They were actually started by 2 founders in a jail cell in Bogota. And there we were doing some fun, seedy work, stuff like piracy and kidnapping. We helped a company prepare for potentially being nationalized by the Venezuelan government. Worked with some of the big oil and gas companies who were worried about, significant events following BP oil spill. But I got an offer to come over to BDO probably about 6-7 years ago from the owners of a boutique whose company was bought by BDO. And what's interesting about this journey, and I mean, Dan was talking about this a little bit, is consulting is unique in that you get pulled in a lot of the different directions. You need to understand business continuity. You need to understand those fundamentals, but you have to also start to learn the business of consulting. How do you actually make money and how do you actually run a consulting company? But then you also have to understand the business of all of the companies that you are associated with. Right? A software company works very, very differently than a hospital network, which is very, very different than an oil and gas company, which is very different than a manufacturing and distribution. So it's a great opportunity to learn a whole heck of a lot about how businesses operate. And, you know, as I'm transitioned through my career, I was kind of tirelessly hungry to learn more about disaster recovery, about enterprise risk management, about insurance, about third-party risk management. All of these adjacent types of risk domains were opportunities to learn more and more. And I will say that one of the things that really, really kind of helped me on this journey and the transition to the private sector was the fact that I was a member of the very, very first VOP course to get my CBCP certification. So Jerry Vivon, who many of you guys may know at the time, was a senior manager while I was a manager. So from time to time, I was reporting to Jerry, and he got Deloitte to sponsor the very, very first in-person VOP course. And that's how I got my CBCP certification. I had a whole bunch of government certifications. I was a professional continuity practitioner. I had my HCEP certification. I had all the stuff that the government cared about, NIMS, ICS. But that helped me get a little bit of credibility to transition over into the commercial sector. My experience was driven mostly just by opportunity. There was no skill bridge program. There was no placement services. There was pretty much nothing other than, you know what I mean, working your network and hoping that somebody would take some pity on a young, stupid captain trying to get out of the military, trying to find a job. And it's funny, I was actually interviewing on the phone from Baghdad, right? Because I knew that I was getting out. So I was lucky that I had a pretty seamless transition. You know, that's a very, very high level overview of kind of our careers and where we ended up. But Dan and I met, and there was a few things that we wanted to talk about in terms of just lessons learned associated with this transition. And one of them is kind of what I was just alluding to. It is great for everybody who's gone and gotten their ABCP or CBCP certification or BCI or whatever other certification that you've gone out and gotten. That is a good foundational first step, but it's kind of like graduating AIT and thinking that you know what the heck is actually going on, right? Like, hey, congratulations, you're a mortarman. You could do exactly one thing. Now you've got to figure out how to apply that language, that learning. So, I mean, one of our big insights is there is a whole heck of a lot more to learn. So, Dan, I don't know if you want to jump in here before I kind of keep rambling on. You're on mute, Dan.
Yeah, that's too bad. I started saying some real gold and I forgot. Well, I will say that you know, one of the most rewarding and challenging aspects of transitioning to consulting is the wide variety of problem sets that we work with from a resiliency perspective. The wide variety of industries that we work with, and even then within those industries, the wide variety of businesses that we work with. I will say, just as a kind of narrow it down a little bit, you know, my current focus of effort, I would say, is manufacturing. So I work with a lot of our manufacturing clients. Now, I think as everybody kind of intuitively understands, that's more than just making something. It's more than just bending metal, right? That's supply chain. That's third-party risk. That's procurement. That's on the backside of actually making the thing, you've got logistics and distribution and retail in some instances. And that is like kind of that end-to-end process that we work with our clients on. My only experience in a factory was when I was 19 years old and I was putting silicon gaskets in boxes before I started working with this. The one thing I took away from that is that this was a really, really, really hard work. But again, the ability to kind of take the framework whether it's professional practices through DRI or other types of resiliency frameworks, and overlay them on a business is a repeatable process. But it does come with significant amount of time to invest in understanding the clients, understanding what their primary concerns are. And it all comes down to like understanding risk profiles, understanding those risk assessments, the types of questions that you kind of start with is, and typically this is all done and before you even start working with that company is, understanding things like, is it a public company? Is it a private company, right? Where are they headquartered? How are they structured? Who buys their stuff? I did work with some defense manufacturers in my last few years in the Marine Corps. Well, they only had one client. It wasn't very diverse.
Hey, good morning. This is Chris. Hey, I wasn't sure if you received my email this morning.
Hey, Chris, you're not on mute.
So let me know. I'm trying to figure out if you have a paid distribution for
Hey, Chris,
senior manager.
We can hear you, buddy.
What the basic cost would be for somebody to get hired into that role. If you get the email, great. Just respond back to that. If not, give me a call.
Can we mute Chris?
I need to present it to an SVP friend of mine who's trying to build a business.
I think we have the admin on that.
For a manager, senior manager, and a director. Thank you very much, sir. Trying to get the cost analysis.
Chris, you're not on mute.
All right, I think we're getting Chris the word. Well, so you kind of out, and that way you're able to work with the clients on putting together that risk profile. They have specific concerns, but using kind of the knowledge of similar like type businesses, you're able to provide them with some additional insights into their risks based on kind of that understanding of the industry. That is wearing out Google. That is wearing out ChatGPT. That is really doing some deep research and checking out books and reading biographies and really kind of understanding some of the specific and unique concerns about those businesses. I will say learning the language of a client. An example would just be, what do they call their employees? We have do they refer to them as associates? Do they refer to them as professionals? How do they refer? It's really goes from like the macro of are they public versus private company to what do they call their HR department? Because being able to speak that language, allows you to further build confidence in your capabilities as a consultant.
Yeah, I think a few things that I'll jump in and add. So I had the privilege of working for quite a while in government and then transitioned over to commercial. There are some pretty significant cultural differences. Think about the military, okay? When there's not a war going on, what's the entire job of the military? Preparing for a war, training for it, right? That's also true of organizations like FEMA. Like when it's not actually an incident, you're trying to prepare the country to respond to it. The entire mission and the culture is dedicated to understanding that things are going to go wrong. That is a drastically different culture than when you go into a company. Day to day, they're trying to make money. Their priorities and what they focus on and the cultural challenges of getting people to think about things that may or may not ever theoretically materialize, is a lot harder in an organization like that. And we can't stress this enough, like really understanding what's going on within a business is how you can differentiate yourself between somebody who's just going to walk through the professional practices or like, okay, we got to do BIAs and we got to do BC plans. You guys have seen me speak at conferences, and I know I've met a lot of you guys. This simple discussion around how much money did we actually lose to business interruption losses over the last 5 years is something that I would venture to say most resilience practitioners can't answer. They don't even understand how to define the scope of the problem. And one of the ways that you can kind of navigate that is understanding and appreciating how many different risk programs a large, complex, global multinational company has. You have insurance folks, compliance folks, GRC, third-party risk management, cybersecurity, disaster recovery. You probably built an AI risk management program fairly recently. We put together a risk management program for paid influencer risk assessments, right? There are a ton of different types of risk programs. So the opportunity to understand how a business is structured, how you can collaborate with them, what you can learn, how you can transition from, you know what I mean, one information from one risk program to another is absolutely critical. And the only thing I'll add about, you know, if you choose to go to the field of consulting, you could be the best resilience practitioner that ever existed and struggle in the business of consulting, because there's a whole heck of a lot more that goes into it. Consulting isn't about the job that you got right now. It's about the job that you got tomorrow, right? You have to understand sales and marketing and developing and retaining talent, everything that goes into running a business. You have to do all of that, and then also bring something unique and differentiated to your clients to make sure that the solutions that you're offering them are really exceptional. So this is all to say, when you think about your journey, right? If you're just transitioning and you've got some certifications, you've got some good fundamentals, but depending on where you're trying to go, there's a heck of a lot more to learn. So I'll pause there in case there's any questions before we go on to our insight number 2.
I think, you know, a commonality across both Jim and Dan for both of you and in the industry itself, linking that back to consulting, curiosity, that natural curiosity to know more about organizations, not just be tied to one thing. You might be someone that's that likes to fixate on lots of things, lots of different aspects of the business. I think Dan had, you know, you had some background history in the logistics when you were in the military, and that might have led you into kind of that curiosity of the manufacturing, solving those complex business problems, supply chains, all the different relationships, and those driving passions that really led you into consulting and into the niche areas of the consulting that you're doing. That's probably something as well, right, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another colleague of ours that you guys may have met, Matt Grossman, who's also involved in DRI, he and I joke around like we do things we haven't done before every single day. You know, it is about bringing good frameworks, methodologies, and being really, really curious to figure out how you can solve the problems, because the world is changing pretty rapidly around us as well. You know, coming out of COVID, we had manufacturers, to Dan's point, like really focused on assured supply. Like McDonald's wants their hamburger patties when they want their hamburger patties, and Ford wants their semiconductors when they want their semiconductors, because it can have some pretty significant impacts. But were they that stringent about it in the years prior? No. Similarly, the insurance market for a while was a very hard market, which is just the insurance term for really expensive. So companies were making a decision to buy less insurance because that makes sense. Why am I going to pay so much more money for the same coverage? So what else are you going to do to offset that risk? So there's constant fluctuation within businesses. That's really interesting. Yeah.
I have a quick question. So given that you guys have so much experience across multiple industries, what kind of advice would you give to a transitioning veteran that is trying to pick a certain industry, you know, over another, say healthcare or insurance or banking? What would be your advice there?
Well, listen, I'm getting towards the tail end of my career, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. So I don't know that you know, I've got the best advice in that regard. I mean, obviously the basics are, if you do have some experience, it makes your transition a little bit easier. Get your foot in the ground, but then be intellectually curious. Build relationships with other people in other industries. Read things just about business in general, like what's going on in the macro trends, and try and just kind of connect those dots as you cultivate your career. These days, obviously, the regulated industries tend to be the most ripe for resilience roles. So that tends to be financial services, healthcare, now technology, with some of the regulations coming out of the European Union, like DORA. So those are always good industries where you can probably get you know, some reliable career path ahead of you. But then, like I said, manufacturing is very, very focused on, you know, resilience, because you're starting to see the insurance industry require certain business continuity capabilities just to get insurance. So there's a lot of ever-changing dynamics within industries, and you're really kind of doing yourself a disservice because this leads into our next point. There is no human resources command, right? There is no team of people in St. Louis or DC or wherever your branch of services human resources command is to tell you what your next job is going to be and when you're going to get promoted and all of those types of things. So the next thing that Dan and I want to talk about is you've got to own your career. So I'll stop talking and let Dan jump in here again.
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of build a little bit on what Jim was talking about previously is you know, we sometimes don't get to choose our path. You know, sometimes there are just opportunities that aren't exactly what we want to do, but it's an opportunity, and we really have to take that. And that allows you to build skills, meet people, and refine and kind of make your own opportunities in this industry. And so my recommendation, and this is kind of what I did, is that, hey, listen, I didn't really want to be a consultant when I got when I started working for BDO. It was a very difficult kind of transition to learn some of those things that Jim was talking about. It's not being a resiliency professional. It is knowing that you have to go out and sell work, you have to keep work, and you have to maintain and build those relationships in a way that's very difficult and not necessarily natural for folks that have just gotten out of the military. And frankly, sales is not natural for a majority of folks. There are some exceptional human beings that are very, very good at it, but it's not necessarily a natural human skill. And so that's my recommendation, really, is take those opportunities that you have in those industries that Jim mentioned, and then you're able to kind of pick and choose a little bit more as your interests become a bit more focused and refined. I mean, generally that is what kind of led me to BDO, and what kept me at BDO are the folks. The people. I mean, just like the military. I mean, you join a place for an opportunity, but you stay at a place because you like what you do and you like the people that you work with. And so that's what's kept me at BDO, and ultimately that's the kind of those are the types of environments that you want to work in. And so when you think about what's next, right? What are those types of things that you want to continue to do? Do you want to build your skill sets in certain areas? Do you want to change industries, change kind of focuses? Do you want more responsibilities? Do you want to be a technician, vice a manager? And so then you're able to kind of once you understand some of those roles and responsibilities a little better, just like the military, you're able to kind of pick and choose. But it's a little bit more effort. Again, leveraging the network, continuing to maintain those and build those folks across a variety of different aspects. Yes, sir. Did you raise your hand? Was it Chris?
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay. Sorry for earlier, although I had to get that request out to Al Berman, but I do believe you guys are hitting things like keynotes for everybody to understand. I'm going to ask this in return to you because I find it very interesting to get an answer from military vets while they're still in, or people that are serving. Do you feel that the service has enabled you to get other jobs and prepare you for such as jobs in business continuity or consulting because of the training and the experiences that you've had in your job career or your classification of a job? Do you think it prepared you for that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, in primarily indirect ways, but directly, I mean, it builds that kind of resiliency mindset. I was, as an infantryman, floating off the coast of Yemen for months, waiting for that bad thing to happen. Right. I was in the, we had contingency plan on top of contingency plan on top of contingency plan. Right. So that was kind of, beaten into me as a lieutenant, captain, major, and so it's that's a very kind of natural transition. Indirectly, I would say, the types of soft skills that allow you to succeed in the military, allow you to succeed in the private sector as well and in consulting, right? Again, just being able to have an adult conversation with other adults, that's not a simple thing for for a lot of folks. And so, those I think I mentioned when we first checked in here that I had forgotten all of my military acronyms. So that's not necessarily true, but you do have to kind of go through a bit of a sanitization process to be able to, kind of have some conversations. And you can turn it on when you need to, but just those being able to listen, ask pointed questions, manage a project, lead a team, those are all transferable skills that are incredibly valuable, which really were forged in the military for me.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is, veterans are being created at all different points in their career. There is a enlisted person who did 4 years, you know what I mean, and is looking to transition out of the military and go to college and then kind of start their career after that. There's, some 06 or general officer with, pushing 30 years of experience. They want probably drastically different things out of their career. Their number of working years, where they're at, the types of roles that they're ultimately looking for. So there's always got to be a little bit of a balance of to Chris's point, the skill set that you already bring to the table. To Dan's earlier point, how much money and where you want to live and all of those types of things, which can pretty significant influence what you're trying to do for your first job. What I would always say is that it's okay to want to kind of transition throughout your career. If you start off doing exercises in the financial services, what you need to do to own your career is figure out how you can take that skill set and translate it to, a manager position in manufacturing and distribution, right? Because there's nobody taking a look at every captain across the entire service and racking and stacking them and trying to tell them what their next job is going to be. You've got to take the initiative and figure out the type of career that you want to build for yourself over, the years or decades that you still have coming up. And that earlier point about being intellectually curious, there are jobs that exist that transitioning service members are like, you got to be kidding me. Like, that's a thing. Your exposure and your opportunity to understand how businesses work and what the career paths that are available to you is absolutely something that, you're going to multiple times throughout your career. I mean, listen, I've reached a point in my life where I found myself all of a sudden listening to NPR, you know what I mean? When I used to just, rock out, but now I find things like insurance interesting. There was no circumstance when I was 25 years old, getting out of the military, where I'm like, what sounds really interesting? Insurance, right? Because a lot of this stuff is just, you're going to kind of continue to progress throughout your career and get exposure to new things.
And so, looking at that, there's no HRC, right? That concept. And you're driving your own career. So a lot of us that were transitioning, they had that HRC guiding function that was making sure that they chose what they did in their career path and everything. And now you're getting out and you've got this opportunity. There's two parts of it. You're rushed, right? You've got this gap you got to fill. You have to fix the information, and then you got to fix what am I going to get? How am I going to get paid? I'm going to provide for the family, whatever, that kind of gap. So there's a nervousness there. But looking at some of the things, when I came out, I bounced, right? So I did that first, got something quick to cover that gap, that nervousness. And then I pivoted and looked at, what do I want in the industry? Like, what is my driving force that makes me happy at work? Because I don't want to just be doing the same thing I was doing in the military and maybe I like the unit or don't. I want to really love the place. I spend half my day at work, so I want to have like half my life being great. And the other half, it's already great because I got a great family and everything. So that kind of stuff really boiled into how I looked at different companies. And I didn't just chase the dollar. I chased like Dan was saying, the people at BDO are great. That was what I was looking for in my next place. It was great people. I was looking for a job, kind of like with you, Jim, where it's the curiosities or the ability to solve unique problems and have complex things. It's not just every day I'm clocking in and I'm going to make a burger and then I'm going to flip the burger and then day's over. It was something different every day. So that was really what I was looking for. What kind of things do you recommend to look at those people that are that initial bounce? Should they hold off on that job or should they go for something quick? What kind of things do we look at there?
Well, I would always say, ask yourself these hard questions. Don't find yourself on your final day. And then, all of a sudden be saying, well, what do I want to do here? Where am I moving? What am I trying to figure out? And a lot of that is getting involved in like VOP, talking to other veterans, get a good understanding of what's available, listening and joining some of these conversations. I think a trap that a lot of transitioning service members fall into is they have a hard time translating what they did and making it relevant to the civilian market. And a lot of that, I think, is really anchored on the justifiable pride in everything that they accomplished during their military service. But there's a lot of people who don't understand, is a BSM a big deal? I don't know, man. It's just like 3 letters, oh, you went to Ranger school. I watched, some horrible movie that does not in any way. Oh, wait, Nicolas Cage was a Ranger in what's the terrible movie where he's a convict? Like, I don't know, those guys are crazy. You've got to figure out how to, like make some of these transitions and figure out what you want to do, but don't feel that you're kind of pigeonholed into a specific type of career after you make that transition. There's nothing wrong with taking some time, figuring it out. I'll admit, government contracting was the easy job to get when I was making my transition. They were spending a ton of money in Homeland Security. It was still kind of a new agency, right? It wasn't that long after September the 11th by the time I was transitioning. So it was rapidly growing. They were using a lot of consultants. Everybody, was eager to hire military service members because we were still at the peak of, 2 wars. So it was a pretty easy transition to make. So I did. I just made the jump to a job that was going to provide stability, gave me enough money where I wanted to live, it supported the lifestyle that we were trying, but I've continued to make transitions. I did not think that I wanted to be a consultant when I made the jump either. I wanted a job with a steady paycheck, reasonable work-life balance, et cetera, et cetera. I wanted to spend some time, start a family. But then I realized I started to like consulting. So I did that for a really, really long time as well. And it's okay to change your mind and continue to, shift your perspective as you progress through your career. I mean, Dan had this conversation about Dan's career a couple of years ago. I'm like, what are you thinking, Dan? Is this consulting for you? You going to stick it out or are you going to, make a move? I never begrudge anybody making a decision that's in the best interest of their personal interest or their family.
When we first started the conversation, they kind of led to building this webinar out. I think it was part of like that passion, that looking at, you got this jump you got to make. You might have to make some quick decisions, but eventually, if you don't come back down to ground and find what you love doing, you're not going to be a great PC or OR guy. Because if you aren't curious, if you're not loving what you do, you're not going to be able to serve that customer base that you need to serve, which is business partners or your clients.
Yeah, at a certain point, you've got to kind of start to ignore the rule book a little bit. And what I mean by that is the ISO standards, the professional practices, that is all amazing foundational knowledge. But the art of being a good resilience practitioner, being intellectually curious, understanding how to take those concepts and apply it to the unique situation of the business that you're working with, that is how people really, really start to differentiate itself, which actually is kind of the last point that Dan and I were hoping to talk about. The science of business continuity. I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm probably going to get a nasty email from Al at some point in response to this. The science of business continuity isn't that hard. Designing and executing a BIA, coming up with a plan template, walking people through the process in an idealized situation isn't that hard. We find that sometimes the hardest thing is the soft skills around it. How do you actually make people care? How do you translate what you're trying to accomplish into terms that resonates with the rest of the business? What Dan and the rest of the team at BDO do, they do a lot of like gamification, and they focus a lot on marketing and the messaging around those initiatives, because put yourself in the seat of a plant manager who is, just making widgets day in and day out. They're worried about a lot of things. They're worried about their staff. They're worried about uptime. When are we going to do maintenance? When are we going to do this? When are we going to do that? But ultimately, at the end of the day, their job is to make as many widgets as they possibly can, given the resources available to them. So you're going to come up to that person and say, hey, in addition to all these other day-to-day responsibilities that you have, and given the fact that, our insurer is going to come to a physical site inspection, the physical security guys are making sure that people are badging in and badging out appropriately, like internal audit's going to come by and make sure that all of your policies, and the HSE guy is going to come through and make sure that you've checked that all the fire extinguishers are charged. Now we need to put one more thing on your plate, and we're going to ask you to dedicate a full day or 2 days or 3 days or however long to business continuity planning, and you want to get a good result out of it. That tends to be the harder part of actually executing and developing a good, strong resilience program. What I think some transitioning service members fall into the trap of taking that military command and control environment and thinking, well, you're going to do it because that's what our bosses said we're going to do today. Like, that doesn't always really play out in a more of a commercial environment. It tends to be a little bit less structured. There's, you know what I mean? No, there's no non-judicial punishment for failing to update your business continuity plan. So you've got to spend a lot more, time with the honey rather than the stick.
Yeah, you're on a very serious challenge that I think all the BCs coming out of the military are going to have that transition where you've got this great knowledge, you know all the things, and then you jump in there and trying to get someone else to buy into what you're selling and being relevant. So it's not just a book on a shelf, like you're actually getting them to do something, and that's going to fuel your passion more than just getting a paycheck for putting a book on a shelf. If you get them to actually pick up that plan, or you see your plan work, or you get that exercise and people get that aha moment that I really need the PC guy in the room, that's what drives it. And being able to find that creative way of doing that, and that leveraging of your some of the things you've learned in the military about leveraging people that don't want to do stuff, because that's probably what we're really great at in the military, is motivating through unique ways. And that's that cross-functional leadership, a skill that I think everyone in the military has. They just don't really realize that that's a strong coming out of the military skill that's going to definitely play into BC.
Yeah, make it interesting, make it sticky. That's what we always like to say is how do we make these experiences memorable? How do we build capability, not shelfware? That is really kind of one of the more interesting aspects of this job. That is how do we create those aha moments for people that have 100 other things that they need to be doing at that particular moment, but recognize its relevancy. It's an additional competing priority.
Definitely gets you those repeat customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest things that you need to do is, when selling this BC process, how's it going to benefit them? What's it going to be? What's in it for them? If you talk on their level, you're actually saying, hey, I'm hearing you. I see what you're saying. So let me show you how it's going to be beneficial for you, so you can keep your job later on if this company decides to have a downturn or have an incident. Because it's very important, because they may not be considered mission essential for them. And be like, oh, I'm out of work for a while. Well, what if you want to stay working? This is how we're going to show you how you're going to stay working. And I show them that process. And it's not like saying, we're here from the government. We're here to help. You got no government to help you. You're on your own.
No, that's exactly right. And kind of showing some of the studies that show investment in resiliency as a competitive advantage, right? Recognizing that this is, it's not just it's a great thing that we do. It's not just a regulatory requirement, but hey, listen, this will actually help you succeed on your bottom line in case something bad does happen. Absolutely. That's a great point.
But we always have to recognize it varies a lot from company to company. You go to a large commercial bank where they have a regulatory requirement and it's ingrained in the culture, and everybody knows it's time to make the donuts. We've got to do this. We're going to do this every single year, right? That is very, very different than some, startup.
It's probably more challenging.
Yeah, I mean, we were working with a tech company. We were trying to like figure out like their business processes, and they're like, we don't even have titles, right? Like what we're doing next week is probably going to look very different than what we're doing today. We're constantly changing and evolving. Like that is a much harder, type of organization to get the traction than, a globally significant bank who does have a big compliance oriented culture. So this is all to say you've got to be willing to adjust your approach based on, the environment, the business that you're working with. And it's going to ebb and flow inevitably over time. A lot of continuity programs, they fall into this trap where something bad happens. So the executive leadership team or the board says, oh my God, how did we find ourselves in this situation? We need to make sure that this never happens again. So they invest a bunch of time, money, and effort, and they put together a really good resilience program. And then nothing happens, or it does happen, but it's managed pretty effectively. There's no major losses, and that continues for a little while. And then some new manager or executive comes in and says, we're spending how much money on this? Like, they cut the budget, they cut a head count, they cut a little bit more, they cut a little bit more. Next thing you know, there's one guy with, duct tape and bubble gum trying to keep the thing, afloat. And then something bad happens again. And the cycle repeats itself. Oh my God, how did we find ourselves in this situation? So
It's like the deployments, right? You go on deployment, you're out there, and the first day one, you're scared shitless. So like you're going around, you don't want something to happen to you, and you're very focused on what's going on. But then you've been there for 4 or 5 months, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, nothing's happening, and then you relax up, and that's when something happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So just to kind of, recap, I would say the best advice that we could give to folks that are transitioning or who have maybe transitioned recently and trying to figure out what their path is again, fully appreciate that you have a heck of a lot more to learn, right? It's just got to be a situation where you are continuously open to new information, changing, tweaking your methodology and your approach to make sure that it works. As you are trying to navigate your career similarly, you've got to kind of figure out what you want to be when you grow up and be deliberate in making it happen. Nobody is going to look out for you. This isn't where you've got some general officer that you did great work for, you know what I mean? Who's always going to, have your best interests. If you're moving from company to company, people are transitioning, you need to make sure that you're taking more ownership of the career that you're deliberately trying to build for yourself. And it's a lot of it's about the soft skills. You need to make people care. You need to figure out how to adjust your approach. We see people all the time, to Chris's point, thinking about what's in it for me. I need to get these BIAs done. I need to get these plans done. I need you to do this so that like your performance evaluation is good. Get them to care about it. Otherwise, they're just never going to give you the time, love, and attention to actually develop a good product. Nobody ever stands around the water cooler talking about how fun a BIA survey was and feels that it was a good use, of their time, So you've got to make sure that you're investing your time and effort and resources effectively as well.
If we look at,
I think it was summed up because I know Dan will agree with this, is that my wife always says, you need to be the CEO of your own career.
yeah, you got to be hungry. Like if you look at Dan, he shot out, found a skill bridge, found that program, and then connected into his career path through that skill bridge. So he had that internship and it pivoted into a thing, but he sought that out through mentorship. So you found a mentor, that mentor got you into a skill bridge, and then you landed that role. And if you look at Jim was out there in deployed zones trying to hunt down those interviews, find the next thing. It wasn't just waiting for something to come to him or for someone to show him how to do it. Found that way. Myself, I did the same thing like Dan. I was out there finding a million mentors, and then that led into a skill bridge. And then I started getting more confident in my abilities and pivoted until I was in a good spot.
But I think in reality, to finish this up quickly, is that you three, even including Lewis, 4 really, that I could see is from outside looking in, because I've been out for just as much probably as you guys have, is that you took the time, you invested your time, effort, and money to literally invest in yourself and you went there, you applied for 100 different or 200 different jobs and looking for things that you wanted to do to make sure you're successful at what you want to do. Because I think it's important, because I know Lewis stepped out of his way. Dan, you did. Dan, you did as well. Jim, your story is phenomenal as well. But I think there's a lot of people who don't really, I'm just going to go get the government job and be happy.
Yeah. The only kind of parting thought that I'll also give too, and I've seen a few folks run into this trap, and this goes to what I was saying earlier about your military experience translating. I don't think I've ever managed a team as big as I did when I was, a captain. You transition out and you said, hey, I was just managing 144 people. You know what I mean? And I think that I should just seamlessly step into this job with the same scope of responsibilities. Sometimes you're just going to have to, zig and zag and give on some things to accept some others, because a lot of times people fail to appreciate the fact that the military is a giant machine, and it does a great job of giving you support, training you for exactly the job that you need. You've got a strong enlisted rank who have got 20 years of experience all around, you know what I mean, supporting you, making you successful. Obviously, speaking to the junior officers out there, officers, but sometimes you have to recognize that that's just not always how it works when you transition over to the civilian marketplace and commercial sector. And if you only go after the jobs that exactly align with, what your expectations are, you're going to be competing with folks who have the exact same title, who have got decades of, civilian experience,
They've bought the budget before.
similar industry. You know what I mean? You have to think about how to make it an easy decision for the hiring managers if you're going out there trying to land a job.
Agreed.
Yeah. I mean, Dan, how big was the biggest team that you were managing when you were in the military?
Hundreds, right? Hundreds. But looking back on that, my level of management was significantly different than the team of 6 that I managed day to day, right? I mean, so it's different. It means different things.
I mean, I was talking to a command sergeant major who's looking to get out. He was a battalion command sergeant major. He had like 730, you know what I mean, enlisted folks.
Yeah.
And he's like, I think I should be able to manage something comparable. I'm like, I think you're going to be on the job market for a long time if, it's a team of 700 or not. Because it's also just like not how businesses are organized. Yeah.
Yeah.
You may have 0 direct reports, 0.
Right. Exactly.
I think it's one of the things that, looking at operational resilience or any of the DC, all the different disciplines, you're not managing people. You're managing processes. You're managing a program.
Right.
So it's management versus leadership. And I think we have a lot of great leaders coming out that need to learn how their managing skills translate more than their leader skills if they're looking to get into this career path. That's one of the challenges I have. I see a resume, they're like, hey, I managed 200 people across the organization. I think, well, hey, maybe you should talk about the functions that you are managing, because that might translate more to that hiring manager, because he doesn't need you to manage 200 people.
That's a great differentiation. That's good.
I also think that sometimes you have more training than the most people that are hiring you. Just saying.
Yeah, and listen, like I said earlier, the military invests heavily in preparedness and training. Like that's kind of the bread and butter. But you got to be able to kind of translate that over. I mean, listen, along my career journey, I also got a master's degree in criminal justice and homeland security. I was in before you could sign a GI Bill over to your kids, so it was use or lose it. I went back. I got an MBA, right, because I wanted to make sure that I was rounding my competencies and skill sets and could take that and apply it to the career that I was trying to build for myself.
I think one thing
nobody's ever going to say, don't acknowledge your military service, right? That's something to be proud of. It's something that helped build you a great set of experience. But ask yourselves, how many service members leave service every single year? If the only way that you're going to be able to translate the value is saying, hey, I was a staff sergeant and I did X and Y and Z, how many other people hit that exact same profile that left military service this year? right? You've got to figure out a way to take those core skill sets and bring a little bit something different into the conversation.
And look at,
Agreed.
you've got 5-6 different jobs in the military. You're leading people, you're maybe part of this additional duty, that additional duty. What one's actually aligned to what you're trying to apply for? And then maybe just isolate that. So if I was an anti-terrorism officer, maybe that's what I did the entire time I was in the military. For my career background, I'm not going to talk about how I was a 2 sergeant, how I was often COIC, anything like that. I'm going to talk about my anti-terrorism because that's what's relevant to the job I'm trying to tackle.
Correct. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. We need to cut it short for people that need to get back to work as well. So Dan, could you go ahead and close it out?
Yeah, of course. No, it was really great having you on. We'll have to follow up a little bit later, see if I can get some information from both you. And I think, Dan, I shot you a LinkedIn request. And
Okay.
if you're willing to, we'd like to share your information to our population, and make sure that they're able to reach out to you if they have any questions afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate for everything. You guys have a great time. And we're looking forward to seeing you at the conference if you are able to make it in Florida.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Thanks.
Take care.
Okay.